What is up, everyone? It is a Monday morning, and my filter looks funky with my blue coffee cup. But good morning, everyone. We're about to dive into the next episode of Mondays in Middle-earth as we read through the Silmarillion. When we started off, we were doing The Hobbit, and then we did The Fellowship of the Ring, then we did The Two Towers, then we did Return of the King, then we did the Appendices, and now we're into the Silmarillion. These are weekly episodes as a general rule that come out every Monday around 9 a.m. Central Time. If you haven't watched the previous episodes, don't forget to check the playlist. Links are down below so that you can find out everything you need to know about this series and watch all the previous episodes to get caught up to speed. Now, I have not read the Silmarillion nearly as often as I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy growing up, so I'm quite a bit fuzzy on a lot of the details here. So it's been sort of a re-educational process to go through and read this. And yeah, there's a lot to uncover, especially when we get into the names and the history and everything else. But as we were going through and reading, the trilogy in particular, one of the things that, from a storytelling perspective, I've often talked about is the importance of world building and the legendarium that Tolkien had in his head from having worked on this for, his whole life from the time he was a child up to the point where he was writing the novel, gave him the ability to have this rich backstory to just like plop things in like poems, or the story of Erendil, in when they're in the halls of Rivendell of Imladris. Those little things add richness and layers to the tapestry that would be missing if they weren't there. But the Silmarillion is not an easy read, everybody. I'm on my Kindle. It's a chunk, and it's not for everyone. So I get it if you've never read it before. That being said, if you have the time, I think it's worth diving into. We're currently into the Quenta Silmarillion section of the book, which is sort of the largest section of the book. It makes up the bulk of things, and we have been going through the history of like the formation and everything of the world from the perspective of the Valar. And when we last left off, we got this phrase of saying, "Thus began the days of the bliss of Valinor, and thus also began the count of time." So everything that had happened up until this point in the reading that we've been doing of the Silmarillion has been before time was ever considered to be a factor. Um, at least that's how I understand it. Obviously, everyone is an expert these days with the power of the internet, so I like to say that experts can be experts on their own turf, but when you're on my turf, hey, all opinions are valid, and I love to hear from lots of different sources. So if you've got a different interpretation of things, I'd love to hear it. Drop it in the comments below, but just remember that's your interpretation. Might not be everybody's interpretation. So without further ado, let's start this next section where it says here, the count of time began. Um, as the ages drew on to the hour appointed, we are told, for the coming of the Firstborn, Middle-earth lay in a twilight between the stars. Now, this has always fascinated me. When I was doing research on the formation of the dwarves last year, I did a couple of videos on the history of the dwarves. And it was very interesting to me to think about how when Iluvatar was, forming the song, in his mind, he's like, y'all over here, you guys can do whatever you want with the planet. You can build things and make mountains and all this other stuff. But when it comes to the children, those are mine. Nobody else gets to do that. I'm the one who gets to define men and elves and so on and so forth. But then along comes Aule, I think is his name, and he's like, I want to make dwarves, and makes the golems. And Iluvatar is like, nah, 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 man, I didn't give you permission to do that. And then, of course, through the pleading of Aule, um, relents and says, okay, they can come into being, but they have to remain asleep until my children are awakened, because my children are the firstborn, and I am, of course, your master. So you're going to do what I say, bitch. I mean, that's essentially what it came down to. Son, listen to me. This is how it's going to be. Um, anyway, I find discussions around the firstborn to be fascinating in terms of before they'd even awakened yet. It says, in the darkness of this twilight, Melkor dwelt and often walked abroad, even though he was, of course, much hated by this point. And he took upon himself many shapes of power and fear, Very scary dude, wielding fire and ice from the tops of mountains to the deep furnaces below in the depths of the planet. And it says here that whatsoever was cruel or violent or deadly in those days was accredited to him. Um, just a bad dude overall. Just basically, you know what? It's better to rule in hell than be a servant in heaven. It's definitely the Satan analogy here, which is another fascinating discussion, by the way, considering that much of what we think we know about Satan was actually invented by people with interpretations of things, and he's not necessarily the evil person that people made him out to be. And I think Melkor is another example of somebody who, again, the Obi-Wan Kenobi analogy, from a certain point of view, the things he did were bad. But this is an area where, and I'm going to go off topic slightly as we're reading. I know in recent years, Tolkien has come under fire from modern scholars who have said it's far too restrictive to think about things in such black and white terms of clearly defined good and clearly defined evil. Because if you look on either side of the equation, both sides do good things and both sides do bad things. So trying to say that one side is good while the other side is evil, it depends on your point of view. I think this was very much this was portrayed in a very interesting way in the Rings of Power show, which I know a lot of us didn't really care for. It had its moments, but there was a lot of stuff that I didn't like. One of the things I did appreciate was, and I don't remember the character's name now, but the main bad guy in the first season who was leading the orcs and looking for the land of Mordor, right? And he was the guy who supposedly had killed Sauron years before in the lore of the show, not the lore of the book. His whole, he was one of the first, who had become an orc, who had been changed from, he was still an elf, but he was one of the father of the orcs essentially. And in the show, again, everything I'm saying is from the perspective of what they did to the lore of the Rings of Power. So I'm not equivocating that to this. But what I really appreciated was that when you look at the actions that individual is taking, all he was doing was trying to find a home for the orcs and trying to give them a place that they could call their own. Yes, he was doing bad things from the perspective of the humans and the elves, in that he was coming in and taking their lands and ripping down trees and enslaving people, all of which are technically, according to modern society, bad things. But his goal of providing for his family, that is not a bad thing. That is not an evil goal. He wanted to do good by his children. He wanted to give them a place to call their own so that they would no longer be persecuted and whipped and cursed and considered the scourge of the world. He wanted to give them a place where the sun didn't shine so that they could be comfortable in the darkness. That's an admirable goal from the perspective of a father figure trying to protect their children. However, on the opposite side of that is what is being done to achieve that goal. And that's where we get into the discussions of good versus evil. It's a very complex topic, and from a philosophical perspective, is good really good? Is evil really evil? It totally depends on which side of the fence you're standing on. It's a great conversation to have. Wow, I was rambling so much my Kindle auto turned off. We might not be getting very deep into the chapters today, everybody. So from the beauty and bliss of Valinor, the Valar came only seldom to the mountains of Middle Earth. But they said they gave. It says here they gave to the land beyond the Pelori their care and love, and in the midst of the blessed realm were the mansions of Aule. For the making of all things, he had the chief part, and he made many things beautifully and shapely, both openly but also in secret. And of him, it says, comes the lore and knowledge of the earth and all the things within the earth. He wants to know the lore of all craftsmen, the weaver, the shaper of wood, the worker of metals, the tiller and the handsman, so on and so forth. And it says here, the last in all the things that grow and bear fruit went to the spouse of Aule, Yavanna Kementari. Aule was named the friend of the Noldor because they learned much from him in those days, and they were the most skilled of the elves. Um, Delighting here, it says in languages and in writing and scripts and embroidery, of artistry, carving, all of these, craftsmanship things, things with the hand and the mind and the word and things. They were also the first who achieved gemcraft, the fairest of which, of course, are the Silmarils, which are a core part of this story, although it says here they are lost. But it says here, above all of them was Manwe Sulimo, highest and holiest of the Valar, who sat on the borders of Aman, never forgetting the outer lands. And he sat upon the highest of the mountains of the world, upon the edge of the sea. I said that despite the fact that he saw everything around the world, and the spirits of the hawks and eagles were constantly flying to and fro from his hall, telling him everything that was happening on the land, many things were hidden from his eyes, where Melkor, of course, sat in the dark, brewing in the impenetrable shadows, excuse me, coming up with evil plans. What show was it that had the quote, "Evil deeds brew evil"? I forget what show that was. Might have been a book too. I don't remember. Quick commercial break, everyone, to give a shout out to all of these amazing people who are the guild champions at the highest tiered membership here on our channel. And of course, all of the members who help keep me full time and doing this for your enjoyment. If you would also like to become a member, you get access to tons of special stuff like live stream, member only chat, private videos for our members several times a week. It's really simple. Just pick your tier, go from there. You can also do super chats or super thanks on any stream, YouTube short, or video that you see. Don't forget the Discord. Links are down below. Let's get back to the video. So there's a great description of Manwe here, as well as Varda, his wife, Elbereth, Queen of the Valar. Um, Descriptions of what they look like, and now we're going into descriptions of the other ones. It looks like it says Olmo, however, was alone, and he did not dwell in Valinor. And he only came there when the councils were called. He preferred to dwell in the outer ocean. This is Poseidon, essentially, governing everything about the waters, the courses of rivers, replenishment of springs, dews and rain, and even in the deep places he gave thought to great and terrible music, the echo of which ran through the world, um, in fountains that rise to the sun, um, where there is joyous music, and in the wells of sorrow and the fountains of the springs of the earth. It says here the Teleri learned much of Ulmo here, and for this reason their music was full of sadness and enchantment. Salmar came with him to Arda, he who made the horns of Ulmo, and also Ose and Uinen, who helped govern the waves and the seas. Okay, and many other spirits. It says it was by the power of Ulmo that even under the darkness of Melkor, life was able to flourish in secret places and the earth did not die. So even though some were lost in darkness or wandered far from the light of Valar, um, they were still able to hear Ulmo. And he has never forsaken Middle Earth. It says, although there has been ruin or change, he has not ceased to take care of it and will never cease to take care of it until the end of days. But it also talks here about how Yavanna was unwilling to forsake the outer lands, for everything that grew was dear to her. And she was very sad because in the beginning, Melkor had destroyed many things in Middle Earth. And she would go out and heal the hurts that he had caused to the realm. And every time she would return, she would urge the Valar um, that war must happen before the coming of the Firstborn would be safe. So it's very interesting. So she's constantly saying, "Hey guys, we're going to have to take Melkor out at some point, because if we don't, bad things are going to happen. So we do have to take care of him before the Firstborn come around." But it also says here that Orome, tamer of beasts, would ride in the darkness of the unlit forests, like a mighty hunter with spear and bow, pursuing monsters and fell creatures upon the face of the world. Basically, chasing down all of Melkor's creepiness. With his white horse, Nahar, shining like silver in the shadows. So the sleeping earth trembled beneath the hooves of his mighty steed, and he would sound his mighty horn, Valorama, upon the plains of Arda, until Melkor himself quailed in the depths of Utumno, terrified of the wrath that would to come. It says here, but even as Orome passed, the servants of Melkor would gather again, and the lands were filled with shadows and deceit. And I think that's going to be where we end today's episode, because the next section it says, all that is said concerning the manner of the earth and its rulers in the beginning of days, and ere the world became such of the children that we were know it. So elves and men are the next section. So it looks like we're going to be getting something about the children next. That's a good stopping point. So, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon if you liked the episode. Don't forget to drop your comments below if you know more than I know, or if you have something else you'd like to add to the equation, add your interpretation of things to the discussion. You can also head over to our Discord channel. There is a section, it's not really used. This is not one of the most popular series on my YouTube channel, which is mostly dedicated to games and film reviews and stuff. But there is a section of Discord where occasionally we have discussed things related to this if you'd like to have discussions there as well. But drop a comment here. It's the easiest way. Anyway, everybody, hopefully you enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe and happy reading.